The morning Jake Patterson woke up to the sound of screaming was the morning the world stopped making sense. He'd been crashed out on his buddy's couch in downtown Atlanta, nursing what should have been a wicked hangover from the night before, but the sounds coming from the street below weren't your typical city noise. This wasn't car horns or construction work or even a regular street fight. This was something primal, something that made every hair on the back of his neck stand straight up like soldiers at attention. He stumbled to the window, squinting against the harsh sunlight, and what he saw down on Peachtree Street made his blood run cold as ice water through his veins. People were running, straight up sprinting like their lives depended on it, and maybe they did. Behind them, chasing them down like rabid dogs, were other people, except these folks weren't right. Something was seriously off about the way they moved, all jerky and wrong, like broken marionettes being pulled by a drunk puppeteer. Their clothes were torn and stained with dark patches that Jake really didn't want to think too hard about. When one of them caught up to an older man in a business suit, tackling him right there on the pavement, Jake's stomach did a flip that had nothing to do with last night's cheap beer. "Yo, Marcus!" Jake shouted, backing away from the window. "Marcus, man, you gotta see this. Something crazy's going down out there." His roommate, Marcus Webb, came stumbling out of the bedroom, looking like he'd been hit by a truck and then backed over for good measure. Marcus was a big dude, played defensive line back in college before his knee gave out, and right now he looked about as confused as a cat in a dog pound. "Bro, why were you yelling?" "My head's killing me," Marcus groaned, but then he heard it too. The screaming. The sounds of chaos that were getting louder by the second. He joined Jake at the window and his eyes went wide as dinner plates. "What the hell? Is that? Are those people eating that guy?" Jake didn't answer because he honestly couldn't. His brain was trying to process what his eyes were showing him, and the two weren't exactly syncing up. This was the kind of stuff you saw in movies, the late-night horror flicks that his little sister Amy loved to watch. Zombies. The word popped into his head unbidden, and he wanted to laugh it off, call himself crazy, but the evidence was right there on the street below, clear as day. "We gotta get out of here," Jake said, his voice coming out steadier than he felt. "Like, right now, man. We need to grab what we can and bounce before whatever that is comes up here." Marcus nodded, still looking shell-shocked, but he was moving, and that was what mattered. They'd been friends since elementary school, and if there was anyone Jake wanted watching his back when the world went sideways, it was Marcus. They threw together bags in record time, not really thinking, just grabbing. Canned food from the kitchen, bottles of water, the baseball bat Marcus kept by his bed, a knife from the butcher block. Jake snatched his phone off the charger and tried calling his sister, but the call wouldn't go through. The network was probably overloaded with everyone and their mother trying to reach their people. He sent a text instead, fingers flying over the screen, "Amy, something bad happening. Stay inside. Lock doors. I'm coming for you. Love you." The apartment building's hallway was already a madhouse when they stepped out. Their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B, was hustling her two kids toward the stairwell, her face set in grim determination. "Boys, don't take the elevator," she called out. "Something's wrong with Mr. Chen from the 4th floor. He tried to bite my Carlos." That sent a fresh wave of ice through Jake's guts. It was spreading through the building already. They took the stairs two at a time, Marcus's bad knee be damned, and burst out into the lobby. The doorman, old Pete who always had a smile and a terrible joke ready, was nowhere to be seen. His station was empty, his chair knocked over, and there was blood on the floor. Not a lot, but enough to paint a picture Jake didn't want to look at. The front doors were standing wide open, and through them, they could see the street had descended into total chaos. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the road, some with doors hanging open like broken wings. A fire hydrant had been knocked over somewhere nearby, sending water gushing into the gutter. And everywhere, there were those things that used to be people, stumbling and lurching and chasing down anyone unlucky enough to be in their path. Jake spotted a woman in scrubs, probably a nurse heading home from a night shift, trying to fight off 3 of them at once. She was screaming for help, but nobody was stopping. Everyone was too busy trying to save their own skin. "My truck's in the parking garage," Marcus said, grabbing Jake's shoulder. "We can make it if we move fast and don't stop for nothing." Jake wanted to help that nurse. Every decent bone in his body was screaming at him to do something, but his survival instinct was screaming louder. "You can't help anyone if you're dead," his brain told him coldly. He hated it, but he knew it was true. They made a break for it, sprinting across the lobby and hanging a hard right toward the parking garage entrance. Behind them, they heard more screaming, the sound of breaking glass, and something that might have been gunshots. Jake didn't look back. Looking back was how you ended up like Lot's wife, turned into a pillar of salt, or in this case, zombie chow. The parking garage was darker than it should have been. Half the lights were out, leaving deep shadows that could have hidden anything. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete, too loud, announcing their presence to anything that might be lurking. Marcus's truck was on the 2nd level, a beat-up Ford F-150 that looked like it had seen better days but ran like a dream. They were almost there when Jake heard it, a low groaning sound that definitely didn't come from any machine. "Marcus, hold up," he whispered, grabbing his friend's arm. They froze, listening. There it was again, coming from behind a concrete pillar about 20 feet away. Something was there, something that was making that god-awful noise that sounded like it was coming from a throat that didn't quite work right anymore. "We gotta keep moving," Marcus whispered back, but his hand tightened on the baseball bat. Slowly, carefully, they edged toward the truck, trying to keep that pillar in sight while watching their backs at the same time. Jake's heart was hammering so hard he was pretty sure it could be heard in the next county. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made him want to jump out of his skin. They were 10 feet from the truck when the thing stumbled out from behind a van. It had been a man once, maybe in his 30s, wearing what looked like gym clothes. Now his shirt was torn and soaked with blood, and his eyes were clouded over like milk had been poured into them. His mouth hung open, and that terrible groaning sound was coming from deep in his chest. When he spotted them, something changed. His head snapped toward them with a crack that made Jake wince, and then he was moving, faster than something that broken-looking should have been able to move. Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and swung that bat like he was going for a home run, connecting with the thing's head with a sound like a watermelon hitting pavement. The zombie, because that's what it was, there was no point in pretending anymore, went down hard. But it was already trying to get back up, that terrible determination in every jerky movement. "Get in the truck!" Marcus yelled, and they ran. Jake yanked open the passenger door while Marcus fumbled with his keys, hands shaking so bad it took him 3 tries to get the right one in the ignition. The engine roared to life just as 2 more zombies stumbled around the corner, drawn by the noise. Marcus threw the truck in reverse, tires squealing, and they shot backward out of the parking space. The GPS on Jake's phone was useless, showing traffic jams on every major road, but that didn't tell them which routes were blocked by the dead or just by accidents and abandoned cars. Marcus drove by instinct, taking side streets and alleys, going the wrong way down one-way roads because traffic laws didn't mean much when the world was ending. They saw horrors on every block. A family trapped in their car, surrounded by a mob of zombies. A cop firing his gun until it clicked empty, then going down under a wave of bodies. A kid, couldn't have been more than 12, sitting on a fire escape and crying for his mom. Every time they saw someone who needed help, Jake felt something inside him die a little. But what could they do? They had a truck and a baseball bat and absolutely no plan beyond survive the next 5 minutes. Stopping would just mean adding 2 more bodies to the count. He kept repeating that to himself like a mantra, trying to make it stick, trying to make the guilt sit down and shut up. Amy lived in Decatur, about 30 minutes away on a normal day. Today, with the city tearing itself apart, it might as well have been on the moon. They'd made it maybe 10 blocks when they hit their first real roadblock. A city bus had jackknifed it across the street, and the area around it was crawling with zombies, at least 24 of them, maybe more. They were feeding on something, and Jake really didn't want to know what. "Gotta find another way around," Marcus muttered, throwing the truck in reverse. But before they could back up, a cargo van came screaming around the corner behind them, going way too fast, clearly not in control. It slammed into a parked car with a crunch of metal, spun out, and came to rest blocking the street behind them. They were boxed in. "Oh, that's just perfect," Jake said, watching in the side mirror as the van's driver kicked open his door and stumbled out, looking dazed. "Marcus, those things are gonna be all over him in about 3 seconds." Sure enough, the sound of the crash had attracted attention. Zombies were peeling away from the bus, turning toward this new commotion, this new potential meal. The van driver saw them coming and his eyes got huge. He ran toward Marcus's truck, waving his arms. "Help! Please, man, help me!" He was young, maybe early 20s, Hispanic kid with a tattoo sleeve on his left arm and terror written all over his face. Jake looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Jake. They'd just been telling themselves they couldn't help anyone, that stopping meant dying. But this was different somehow. This was right in front of them, immediate, a choice they had to make right now. "We got room in the back seat," Jake heard himself saying, and Marcus was already nodding, making the decision. "Get in!" Marcus shouted out the window. "Move your butt, man, right now!" The kid didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted for the truck, feet pounding pavement, with a growing crowd of zombies right on his heels. He grabbed the back door handle, yanked it open, and threw himself inside just as the first zombie lunged for him, fingers scraping across the closing door. "Go, go, go," the kid yelled, totally unnecessarily because Marcus was already gunning it. The truck jumped the curb, bounced through someone's front yard, took out a mailbox and a lawn gnome, and burst back onto the street on the other side of the bus. Behind them, the zombies were losing interest now that the prey was out of reach, already turning back to whatever had been occupying them before. "Thanks, man," the kid gasped from the back seat, breathing like he'd just run a marathon. "Holy crap, thanks. I thought I was dead. I thought I was so dead. Those things were everywhere, came out of nowhere, and I was making a delivery, just a regular Tuesday morning delivery. And then everyone started screaming and," he was babbling, the words tumbling out in a rush, adrenaline and fear making him run at the mouth. "It's cool, you're good now," Jake said, trying to sound calmer than he felt. "What's your name, man?" "Tommy. Tommy Vasquez." "What the hell is happening? Are those really, I mean, they can't be, but they look like zombies," Marcus finished flatly. "Yeah, bro. That's what we're dealing with. Honest to God, end of the world, Walking Dead zombies." Saying it out loud like that made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't a temporary thing, wasn't a riot or a gas leak causing hallucinations. This was the apocalypse, the real deal, and they were living through it. Tommy fell silent for a moment, processing. "Then, my family. My mom and my little sisters, they're in College Park. I gotta get to them. I gotta make sure they're okay." The desperation in his voice was something Jake understood right down to his bones. That was Amy out there somewhere, hopefully safe in her apartment, hopefully smart enough to stay inside and stay quiet. "We're heading to Decatur to get Jake's sister," Marcus said. "After that, we can figure out College Park. But first things first, yeah? One rescue at a time." It was a promise and a commitment, and Jake felt something loosen in his chest. They weren't alone. They had a crew now, small as it was, and that meant something. The drive to Decatur was like navigating through a nightmare. They saw things that Jake knew would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that turned out to be. A elementary school with tiny handprints and blood on the windows. A hospital with smoke pouring from the upper floors and people jumping from the lower ones, preferring a quick death to whatever was happening inside. A priest standing in front of his church, trying to give last rites to a zombie, getting bitten for his trouble. But they also saw hope, weird as it sounds. They saw people helping each other, pulling strangers into houses and barricading doors. They saw a group of firefighters, still in their gear, holding off a crowd of zombies with axes and pike poles while civilians escaped behind them. They saw a mom with a baby strapped to her chest, fighting off a zombie with nothing but a frying pan and sheer determination, and winning. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. Amy's apartment complex was a cluster of 3-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard. It looked quiet from the outside, almost normal if you ignored the abandoned cars in the parking lot and the eerie absence of people. Jake's text still sat on his phone, delivered but not read. "Amy's in Building B, 2nd floor," he said, checking the street before opening the door. "Apartment 214. They moved as a unit, the 3 of them, staying close and watching every angle. Marcus had his bat. Tommy had grabbed a tire iron from the truck. Jake had the kitchen knife, which felt woefully inadequate, but it was better than nothing. The courtyard was empty, a kid's bicycle lying on its side near the fountain, abandoned mid-ride. A door on the 1st floor stood open, but nothing moved inside that they could see. Building B's entrance was locked, thank God, which meant the zombies hadn't gotten in. Probably. Jake punched in the door code that Amy had given him months ago, praying she hadn't changed it. The lock clicked open and they slipped inside, letting the door close firmly behind them. The lobby was dim and quiet, and their footsteps on the tile floor sounded way too loud. The stairs to the 2nd floor felt like climbing a mountain. Every shadow could have hidden a zombie. Every apartment door they passed could have burst open to reveal a nightmare. But they made it to 214 without incident, and Jake pounded on the door with his fist. "Amy! Amy, it's Jake! Open up!" For a horrible moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched out, and Jake's imagination went into overdrive, showing him all the terrible things that could have happened to his little sister. Then he heard it, the sound of furniture being moved, and Amy's voice, suspicious and scared. "How do I know it's really you?" Relief hit him like a physical thing. She was alive. She was okay. "Come on, Ames, it's me. Remember when you were 8 and you tried to give the cat a bath and it scratched up your arms and you made me promise not to tell Mom? I kept that promise. It's me." The door cracked open, revealing Amy's face, pale and frightened but definitely alive and definitely not a zombie. Then it swung wide and she threw herself at him, hugging him so hard his ribs creaked. She was 23, a grad student at Emory, and usually too cool to show this kind of affection to her big brother. But today wasn't a usual day. "I was so scared," she said into his chest. "I heard the screaming and I looked outside and I saw them and I didn't know what to do. I tried calling you but the phones weren't working and I've been watching the news but it's all bad, Jake, it's all so bad everywhere." She was talking fast, almost as fast as Tommy had been, fear loosening her tongue. "I know, kid, I know. But we're here now and we're getting you out." He pulled back to look at her, checking for injuries, for bites, for any sign that she was hurt. She looked okay, just scared out of her mind. Behind her, he could see she'd barricaded the door with her couch and a bookshelf, smart thinking. "You got anything you need to grab? We gotta move fast." She nodded and ducked back into the apartment, returning 30 seconds later with a backpack that looked like it was stuffed full. "Water, food, first aid kit, my phone charger, flashlight," she rattled off. "I was a Girl Scout. I know how to be prepared." Despite everything, Jake felt a flash of pride. His little sister was keeping her head while the world fell apart. They were halfway back to the truck when they heard the screaming. It was coming from the 1st floor, from that apartment with the open door they'd noticed on the way in. A woman's voice, desperate and terrified. "Help! Somebody help me, please. In a kid's voice too, crying, calling for mommy. Jake stopped dead in his tracks. Amy grabbed his arm. Jake, no. We can't. We need to go. She was right, he knew she was right, the same way he'd been right not to stop for all those other people they'd seen. But his feet weren't listening to his brain. They were already moving toward the sound. Jake, man, we don't know what's in there, Marcus said, but he was following too, because that's what they did. They were the kind of idiots who ran toward trouble instead of away from it. Tommy and Amy fell in behind, and just like that, they were committed. The apartment door hung open, revealing a dark interior. The screaming was coming from somewhere in the back. Hello? Jake called out. We're here to help. Where are you? The woman's voice called back, the bedroom. We're locked in the bedroom. There's one of those things in the hallway, it won't leave, please help us. Sure enough, there was a zombie in the hallway, a woman in a bathrobe, swaying in front of a closed door and clawing at it with broken fingernails. She'd been dead for a while, the smell was enough to make Jake's eyes water. When she heard them come in, her head turned with that awful crackling sound, and cloudy eyes fixed on them with unmistakable hunger. Marcus stepped up, bat at the ready. Y'all might want to look away for this, he said, and then he swung. The fight, if you could call it that, was over in seconds. The zombie went down and didn't get back up. Marcus stood over the body, breathing hard, looking a little green. Man, that was somebody's mom or sister or something. That was a person. Not anymore, Jake said quietly. Not for a while now. He moved to the bedroom door and knocked. It's okay, it's gone. You can come out now. He heard locks clicking, a chain rattling, and then the door opened to reveal a woman in her 30s holding a baseball bat of her own, and a little girl, maybe 6 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit and crying. Thank you, the woman breathed. Thank you so much. That was my neighbor, she came to the door this morning asking for help, and when I opened it she tried to bite me. I got away, but we've been trapped in here for hours. She looked at the body on the floor and her expression went complicated, sad, and relieved and guilty all at once. What's your name? Amy asked gently, crouching down to the little girl's level. I'm Amy. What's your name, sweetie? Zoe, the girl whispered. Is the monster gone? The monster's gone, Amy confirmed. But there are more outside, so we need to be really quiet and really brave, okay? Can you do that? Zoe nodded, still clutching that rabbit like it was the only solid thing in the world. The woman's name was Rachel Monroe, and she was a single mom, a paralegal who'd been working from home when everything went crazy. She had supplies, she was smart, and she was clearly ready to do whatever it took to protect her daughter. We have a truck, Jake told her. We're getting out of the city. You're welcome to come with us. Rachel looked at her daughter, then back at Jake. Where are you going? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Jake looked at Marcus, who shrugged. They hadn't thought that far ahead. Somewhere away from the cities, Marcus said. Somewhere with less people, which means less zombies. Figure we head north, find someplace rural we can hole up. My uncle has a cabin, Tommy spoke up. Up in the mountains, near Dahlonega. It's about 90 miles from here. He goes there for hunting season. It's got solar panels, a well for water, he stocks it with canned goods. It's off the grid. If we can make it there, we'd have a real chance. They all looked at each other, this group of strangers thrown together by the end of the world. A college football washout. A bartender. A delivery driver. A grad student. A paralegal and her kid. Not exactly the dream team. But they were what they had, and that would have to be enough. Then that's where we go, Jake said. Everyone good with that? Nods all around, even from little Zoe. All right then. Let's get back to the truck and get the hell out of Atlanta. The trip back through the courtyard was tense, every sound making them jump, every shadow a potential threat. But they made it to the truck without incident. It was tight quarters with 6 people and all their gear, but they made it work. Rachel and Zoe climbed in back with Tommy. Amy rode shotgun. Marcus drove, because it was his truck and he was the best driver anyway. Getting out of the city was the hardest thing they'd done yet. The streets were clogged with abandoned vehicles, fires burned unchecked, and zombies were everywhere, growing in number by the hour. Every person who got bitten, every person who died, came back as one of them. It was exponential growth, a cascade failure of humanity. By Jake's estimate, looking at the chaos around them, Atlanta was already lost. Maybe all the major cities were. Maybe the whole damn country. They had to backtrack a dozen times, finding routes blocked or overrun. Once, they got stuck behind a traffic jam of cars trying to flee north on the same highway they were attempting to take. While they sat there, going nowhere, zombies began to close in, drawn by the sound of engines and the smell of living flesh. People started abandoning their cars and running, which just made the problem worse. Marcus threw the truck in reverse, mounted the median, and drove on the wrong side of the highway until they could take an exit. They saw a refugee camp that the National Guard had set up in a parking lot, but it was already being overrun, soldiers firing into the crowd while civilians scattered. They saw a news helicopter crash into an office building. They saw a gang of looters fighting off zombies while carrying flat-screen TVs, which would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. They saw the world ending in real time, and all they could do was keep driving. It took them 6 hours to go 90 miles. 6 hours of constant tension, of close calls and near misses. They had to stop once for gas at a station that was miraculously empty of both people and zombies. Marcus filled up while the others stood guard, every nerve on edge. They grabbed what supplies they could from the attached convenience store, loading up on water and snacks and anything useful. Tommy found a radio behind the counter and clicked it on, scanning through stations. Most were just static, but he found one that was still broadcasting, a guy with a deep voice and a southern accent who sounded like he was barely holding it together, repeating, "The Centers for Disease Control has issued a statement. The contagion is spread through bites and through contact with infected bodily fluids. Those who die from the infection reanimate within hours. There is no cure at this time. The government is establishing safe zones in the following locations," then static again, the signal lost. "Safe zones," Rachel said bitterly. "Like that refugee camp we saw? How safe did that look?" She had a point. When the dead outnumbered the living and they kept coming no matter what, how safe could anywhere really be? By the time they reached the turnoff for Dahlonega, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked way too pretty for the end of the world. The mountains rose around them, covered in trees that were just starting to show their fall colors. Up here, away from the city, things looked almost normal. You could almost pretend that nothing was wrong, that this was just a regular road trip. Tommy directed them down a series of increasingly smaller roads, from highway to county road to what was basically a dirt track winding up into the hills. "It's just up here," he said, leaning forward between the front seats. "Around this curve and there." The cabin came into view, a sturdy-looking log structure with a green metal roof, surrounded by trees. It was small, maybe 2 bedrooms, but it looked solid and defensible. Better yet, there were no zombies in sight. They pulled up to the cabin cautiously, not trusting the apparent peace. Marcus killed the engine and they sat in silence for a moment, listening. Birds singing. Wind rustling through the leaves. No groaning. No screaming. No sounds of civilization tearing itself apart. "Okay," Jake said. "Let's check it out, but careful. Could be squatters, could be zombies, could be anything." The cabin was empty, though it looked like Tommy's uncle had been there relatively recently. There was food in the cupboards, blankets on the beds, firewood stacked on the porch. A generator sat in a shed out back, along with several full gas cans. The solar panels on the roof were dusty but functional. There was even a hand pump well that, after some priming, produced clean, cold water. It was like finding an oasis in the desert. "We should secure the perimeter before it gets dark," Marcus said, falling into a leadership role naturally. board up the windows on the ground floor, make sure all the doors have solid locks. Tommy, you know if your uncle kept any weapons here? Tommy led them to a closet where a gun safe sat, and to everyone's relief, it wasn't locked. Inside were 2 hunting rifles, a shotgun, and a couple of boxes of ammunition. Not an arsenal, but better than a baseball bat and a tire iron. Jake had gone shooting a few times with his dad before the old man passed, so he knew the basics. Marcus had been in ROTC for a semester before dropping out. Between them, they could probably figure out how to not shoot themselves in the foot. They worked together as the sun set, turning the cabin into a fortress. They moved a heavy bookshelf in front of the back door. They nailed boards across the downstairs windows, leaving just enough gap to see out and, if necessary, shoot through. They did an inventory of supplies, enough canned food for maybe 2 weeks if they rationed carefully, several cases of bottled water plus the well, a first aid kit that was pretty well stocked, batteries, flashlights, candles, matches. They could survive here for a while, at least long enough to figure out their next move. Amy got Zoe settled in one of the bedrooms, reading to her from a book she found on the shelf, some kid's story about a bear and a mouse. The little girl's eyes were heavy, exhaustion finally catching up with fear. Rachel stood in the doorway watching them, and the look on her face was complicated. Relief and gratitude and bone-deep weariness all mixed together. "Thank you," she said to Jake, who was passing by with an armload of firewood. "For stopping. For helping us. You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," Jake said. "I got a sister too. I'd hope someone would do the same for her if I couldn't be there." He paused, looking out at the darkening forest. "We gotta stick together now, you know? All of us who are left. That's the only way we make it through this." They gathered in the main room once Zoe was asleep, the 6 adults, sitting around a fire in the stone fireplace because the temperature was dropping and because the firelight was comforting in a way that flashlights weren't. Nobody said much at first. They were all processing, all trying to accept that the world they'd woken up to that morning was gone, probably forever. "What do you think happened?" Amy finally asked. "Like, what caused it? Virus? Chemical spill? Government experiment gone wrong?" It was the question they'd all been wondering but were too afraid to voice. "Does it matter?" Marcus replied. "Knowing why won't bring back the dead or cure the ones who are walking around." He had a point, but humans needed explanations, needed things to make sense, even when they really didn't. "My friend works at the CDC," Rachel said quietly. "Worked. Past tense, I guess. She texted me this morning before the phones went down. Said they'd been tracking a weird pathogen for about a week, something that showed up in hospitals across the country at the same time. Patients coming in with flu-like symptoms, then dying, then coming back. They tried to contain it but it spread too fast." She said, Rachel's voice broke. She said this was it. The big one. The pandemic they'd always been afraid of. "So it's a disease," Tommy said. "Diseases can be cured. Scientists are probably working on a vaccine right now. We just gotta survive until then." He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as them. Jake wanted to believe that. He wanted to think that somewhere, in some secure lab, smart people in white coats were cooking up a cure and in a few weeks this would all be over. But he'd seen the chaos in Atlanta, the total collapse of order in society. Even if someone invented a cure tomorrow, how would they manufacture it? Distribute it? Administer it to millions or billions of zombies? Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. "We'll take shifts on watch tonight," Marcus said, steering the conversation to practical matters. 2 people at a time, 4-hour shifts. Keep a fire going, keep the rifles handy. Anything approaches the cabin, we wake everyone up. Sound good? Everyone nodded. It was good to have a plan, good to have something concrete to focus on instead of the existential horror of everything. Jake and Marcus took the first watch, sitting on the porch with rifles across their laps, watching the darkness between the trees. The forest was alive with sounds, crickets and owls and things rustling in the underbrush, every sound making them tense up until they identified it as normal, non-zombie related. The stars were out in force, more stars than Jake had ever seen in the city, the Milky Way sprawling across the sky like someone had spilled sugar. "You think we're gonna make it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Like, long-term? You think humanity survives this?" Jake thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about all the terrible things they'd seen that day. But he also thought about the good things. The firefighters protecting civilians. The mom with the frying pan. Their little group, strangers who'd come together and helped each other when they could have just looked out for themselves. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I think we got a shot. We're adaptable, you know? We figure stuff out. And as long as there are people willing to fight, willing to help each other, we got a chance." It might have been naive. It might have been stupid optimism in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But it was what Jake chose to believe, because the alternative was despair, and despair would kill them faster than any zombie. The night passed without incident. They rotated through watches, everyone getting at least a few hours of sleep, though it was restless sleep full of nightmares. When dawn broke, painting the sky pink and gold, they were still alive, still safe, still together. It was a small victory, but these days, you took what you could get. Over breakfast, canned beans heated over the fire because they were saving the generator fuel, they talked about the future. Short-term plans first. They needed to secure more supplies. There was a small town about 5 miles down the mountain, Dahlonega proper. It might be overrun, or it might be a ghost town, but either way, there'd be supplies there they needed. A grocery store, a pharmacy, a hardware store. Tommy knew the area, said it was mostly tourists and retirees, probably had a population of around 6,000. Had. Past tense. "We goin' fast, hit the key locations, get out," Marcus outlined. "Take the truck, keep it running, always have an escape route. We don't engage the zombies unless we absolutely have to. Noise attracts them, so we stay quiet. In and out like ghosts." "I should stay here with Zoe," Rachel said. "She's too young for a supply run, and someone should guard the cabin anyway." That made sense. Amy volunteered to stay too, said she'd keep working on fortifying their defenses. That left Jake, Marcus, and Tommy for the run. They geared up like they were heading into a war zone, which in a way they were. Rifles loaded and ready. Backpacks empty, ready to be filled with whatever they could scavenge. A list of priorities: medicine, canned food, batteries, propane for the camping stove they'd found, seeds if they could find them because eventually they'd need to think about growing their own food. They said their goodbyes to the others like they might not be coming back, because that was a real possibility. The drive down the mountain was tense. Every curve in the road could have hidden a horde of zombies. Every abandoned car they passed could have had one of those things inside, waiting. But they made it to the outskirts of Dahlonega without seeing a single zombie. The town was quiet, eerily so. Cars parked neatly along Main Street. Shops with their lights off and their doors closed. It looked like everyone had just vanished, raptured up to heaven and leaving the world behind. "This is creepy," Tommy muttered. "I'd almost rather see zombies. At least then we'd know what we're dealing with." Jake agreed. The uncertainty was worse than the known threat. Where was everyone? Dead? Evacuated? Hiding in their homes? They parked in front of Engel's grocery store, and Marcus left the engine running, keys in the ignition. "If we get separated, we meet back at the truck," he said. "If the truck's gone or overrun, we meet back at the cabin. Everyone clear?" Clear nods all around. The grocery store's automatic doors were stuck half open, giving them just enough room to slip through. Inside, it was dark and smelled off, like the power had been out for a while and the refrigerated stuff was starting to go bad. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing aisles that had been partially looted but not completely stripped. They moved methodically, grabbing canned goods, dried pasta, rice, anything that would keep. The pharmacy section had been hit hard, but they found some antibiotics, pain relievers, bandages. They were loading their third bag when Jake heard it. A shuffling sound from the back of the store. Then a low moan that made his skin crawl. "We got company," he whispered, and the other two tensed, hands going to their weapons. 3 zombies emerged from the darkness at the back of the store, shuffling toward them with that awful jerky gait. They'd been employees, still wearing their green Ingalls vests. One was missing an arm. Another had most of its face torn off. The third looked almost normal except for the cloudy eyes and the dark blood staining its shirt. "Back to the truck, nice and easy," Marcus said. "Don't run unless they charge." They retreated slowly, keeping their eyes on the zombies, bags of supplies clutched in their hands. The zombies followed, moaning louder now, and Jake realized they were calling to others. Sure enough, more zombies began to appear, stumbling out of the darkness, drawn by the sound. They made it to the doors and squeezed through, and that's when things went sideways. The parking lot, which had been empty when they went in, now had at least a dozen zombies scattered across it, and more emerging from the surrounding buildings. They'd been hiding, dormant maybe, and the noise had woken them up. "Run!" Marcus shouted, and they ran. Feet pounding pavement, bags bouncing, zombies lurching after them from every direction. Jake's lungs burned and his heart hammered, and he didn't dare look back. The truck was right there, so close, engine still running, thank God. Marcus got there first, threw his bags in the bed, and jumped in the driver's seat. Tommy was right behind him. Jake was third, and the zombies were right on his heels. He felt fingers grab at his backpack and he twisted away, losing his grip on one of the bags. It hit the ground and cans rolled everywhere, but there was no time to grab them. He threw himself into the truck and Marcus hit the gas before Jake even had the door closed. They shot forward, scattering zombies like bowling pins, and roared out of the parking lot. "Everyone okay?" Marcus asked, checking the rearview mirror. "Nobody bit?" Jake and Tommy checked themselves frantically, checking for tears in clothes, for scratches, for any sign of broken skin. Nothing. They were okay. They'd made it. "That was too close," Tommy breathed, slumping back in his seat. "Way too close, man." Jake agreed, but they had supplies, more than they'd come with, and nobody died. In the new world, that counted as a win. They hit 2 more locations, a pharmacy that was mostly cleaned out but still had some useful stuff, and a hardware store where they grabbed tools, nails, rope, tarps, batteries, and a couple of camping lanterns. Each stop was a tense dance with the dead, but they got better at it, faster, more efficient. By early afternoon, the truck bed was loaded with supplies and they were heading back up the mountain to the cabin. The others were relieved to see them return safely. They unloaded the truck together, and it felt good to see their stores growing, to feel like they had a buffer against disaster. That night, with full bellies and a well-stocked pantry, the mood was almost hopeful. But hope was a dangerous thing in the apocalypse, Jake was learning. Because just when you started to feel safe, the world reminded you that safety was an illusion. It happened on their 4th night in the cabin. Jake was on watch with Rachel, the 2 of them sitting by the fire and talking quietly about their lives before, when they heard it. An engine, growing louder, coming up the mountain road. They woke the others and watched from the windows as headlights appeared through the trees. A vehicle, moving fast, coming straight toward the cabin. It screeched to a stop in the clearing and 4 people piled out, 3 men and a woman, all of them armed with guns and looking desperate. "Hello, the cabin," one of the men shouted. He was tall and broad, wearing camo gear and a serious scowl. "We know you're in there. We saw your smoke. We need shelter and we need supplies. We can trade, or we can take. Your choice." Jake felt his stomach sink. They'd been so worried about zombies that they'd forgotten the other threat in the apocalypse. Other survivors, desperate and willing to do whatever it took to stay alive. He looked at Marcus, then at the others. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But this was their sanctuary, their safe place. They'd fought too hard to get here to give it up without a fight. Marcus stepped up to the door, rifle in hand. "We don't want trouble," he called out. "We got enough supplies to share a meal and some water, but that's it. We're barely making it ourselves." The man in camel laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Son, I don't think you understand the situation. We got 4 guns out here and we ain't asking. Now you can open that door and we can talk like civilized people, or we can come in there and take what we want. What's it gonna be?" Jake's mind raced. They could fight, but people would die, maybe people on both sides. They could surrender, but who knew what these folks would do once they were inside? They could try to bluff, claim they had more people, more guns, but would these guys buy it? Every option was bad. Every choice led to pain. And then Amy did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. She opened the door, stepped out onto the porch with her hands raised, and faced down the armed strangers. "We're not your enemies," she said, her voice carrying clear and strong in the night air. "There's plenty of threats out there without us fighting each other. You want shelter? You want food? We can share. But not like this. Not with guns pointed and threats made. We work together or we all die alone. That's the choice. That's the only choice that makes sense anymore." For a long moment, nobody moved. The standoff held, balanced on a knife's edge. Then the woman in the group lowered her gun. "She's right, Dalton," she said to the man in camo. "We're better than this. We're not thieves." One of the other men lowered his gun too, looking ashamed. The fourth kept his raised, but he was clearly uncertain now. Dalton's jaw worked like he was chewing gravel. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "All right," he said. "All right, we'll do it your way. But if this is a trick—" "No tricks," Marcus said, stepping out beside Amy. "Come on inside. We'll share what we got, and you can tell us your story. Then we figure out how we move forward together." And just like that, their group of 6 became a group of 10. Dalton and his crew were from Gainesville, had been holed up in a sporting goods store until a horde of zombies had flushed them out. They'd been driving for 2 days, looking for someplace safe, watching their fuel gauge drop and their hope drain away. They were exhausted, scared, and at the end of their rope, which made them dangerous, but it also made them human. Over the next few hours, sitting around the fire, they shared their stories. Where they'd been when it started. What they'd lost. Who they were trying to protect. Dalton's wife had died in the initial outbreak. The woman, Keisha, had been a nurse and had seen too many patients turn. The other 2 men, brothers named Cody and Brett, had been mechanics, had watched their shop get overrun. It wasn't easy, absorbing 4 more people into their little community. The cabin was crowded. Supplies that might have lasted 6 people 2 weeks would last 10 people a lot less time. Personalities clashed. Dalton and Marcus butted heads over who was in charge. Keisha's medical knowledge was invaluable, but her blunt way of speaking rubbed some people wrong. But they made it work, because what choice did they have? The world outside was a nightmare of walking corpses and collapsed civilization. Inside the cabin, they had warmth and food in each other. They established rules, a council system where major decisions got voted on. They organized supply runs and watch rotations. They started planning for the long term, clearing a space for a garden come spring, talking about rainwater collection and trapping game. Days turned into weeks. They had close calls, a horde of zombies that wandered near enough to the cabin that they had to go silent for a whole day, barely breathing until the dead moved on. They had victories too, Brett figuring out how to get an old radio working so they could scan for broadcasts, occasionally picking up fragments of news from outside. There were other survivors out there. Some military installations were still operational. There was talk of safe zones in the Midwest, in the Rockies, places where the population density had been low enough that the outbreak was contained. But travel was risky, maybe too risky with winter coming on. They decided to stay put, to make the cabin their home base, at least until spring. They'd learn what they could, adapt, survive. And maybe, just maybe, they'd start to rebuild. Jake stood on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. Amy came out to join him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "You think we're gonna make it?" she asked, echoing the question Marcus had posed that first night. Jake thought about everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived. He thought about the group inside the cabin, this makeshift family forged in the fires of the apocalypse. They were broken people, all of them, scarred by loss and trauma. But they were also strong, resilient, determined to keep going no matter what. "Yeah," he said, putting his arm around his sister's shoulders. "Yeah, Ames, I think we are. It's gonna be hard, and it's gonna hurt, and we're gonna lose people along the way. But humans are survivors. We've made it through ice ages and plagues and wars. We'll make it through this too. Not all of us, maybe. But enough. Enough to carry on, to remember, to rebuild." Amy leaned her head on his shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time the dead started walking around trying to eat people," he said, and she laughed, a real laugh, the first he'd heard from her in weeks. It was a good sound, a human sound, a sound of life persisting in the face of death. Inside the cabin, someone started playing a guitar that Tommy had found on a supply run. Voices joined in, singing an old song that everyone knew the words to. It was off-key and ragged, but it was music, it was art, it was proof that humanity was more than just survival, more than just the daily fight to stay alive one more day. This was the echo of the end times, Jake thought. Not the screaming and the dying, not the collapse and the chaos. This was it, right here. People coming together, helping each other, finding joy and meaning in connection even in the darkest of times. As long as that echo persisted, as long as people chose hope over despair, community over isolation, compassion over cruelty, then the end times weren't really the end at all. They were just a new beginning, hard and painful and terrifying, but a beginning nonetheless. And Jake Patterson, bartender and survivor, was going to do everything in his power to make sure that beginning had a fighting chance. The stars came out above the mountains, ancient and unchanging, watching over a world that had been transformed. Somewhere out there, zombies still walked, civilization still crumbled, and countless people still suffered and fought and died. But here, in this small cabin on this small mountain, 10 people had found something worth fighting for. Each other. And that, in the end, was everything.